Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and I was always told how to voice radio, so today we are continuing our look at the rotation. Long story short, every year Pokemon turn around and go, right, you know that trading card game? Well, you can now only use sets from this one onwards. So for the past year, in standard at least, we have been using from X and Y onwards, all sets further forward than X and Y being legal for tournament play. We are now moving to Primal Clash onwards, which means all sets from Primal Clash forwards will be legal for tournament play. We have already looked at X and Y, Flash Fire and Furious Fists, and we've done our quick look, our introduction, our cliff notes to the rotation. So now we are looking at the final set that's being rotated, not the final video though, because after this is done, we're going to be looking at the decks that you should be playing after the rotation. So with that in mind, let's have our look at the cards from Phantom Forces that we are going to be missing. Usual things apply. If the card has been reprinted anywhere, all versions of it are legal. And of course, do remember that I cannot go through every single card in the set, not without doing a hugely long video. And although the response to these videos has been very good, and they've been going down very well, I think going through every single card might be excessive. So starting off, poor old Pyroar. Now we looked at him with Flash Fire. We saw that the Flash Fire one with the cool ability was being rotated. As is this one, it's got the ability Flare Command. Discard a fire energy attached to him, and it's basically a Lysander. Now this reminds me of Victory Bell's ability. We looked at him in one of our previous videos. The difference with Pyroar is that you can have the energy attached to him, because you can use Blacksmith. You can use Blacksmith to attach 2 cards to Pyroar, or 2 energy cards to Pyroar, and then that gives you 2 Lysanders on subsequent turns. Now, to be fair, this was only really good in a Pyroar deck. You could play 3 of the Pyroar with the ability, and then 1 of this for a Lysander style effect, so it was never going to see a huge amount of play outside of that. But it always makes me sad when fun abilities on interesting Pokemon go away. We are losing Manectric and Mega Manectric, and these boys were the basis for their own deck. In fact, they were the basis for many decks. Manectric on his own was a very, very good Pokemon. Overrun did 20 to the active, 20 to the bench for a colourless energy, and Assault Laser did 60 to the active or 120 if they had a tool attached. And if you were facing against an EX that didn't want to attach a tool, you could just go ahead and put a head ringer on them. Then their attack cost increased by 1, and they had a tool on there, so you could go ahead and use Assault Laser. Now, you can actually use this as its own deck, because if you put a Muscle Band on Manectric, you're doing 140, Laser Verbank then puts you up to 170, and for a while this was the basis for some people like Luke Kirkham, noted UK player, who would just try and KO everything using Manectric and Hypnotoxic Laser. But mostly it was played with Mega Manectric. Turbo Bolt for 2 energy did 110, and it allowed you to attach 2 basic energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. Now, the fact that it had free retreat and it could heal itself using Rough Seas meant that you could just flick back and forth between 2 or 3 Mega Manectrics, but you could also pair this with basically anything. You use Battle Compressor to put the energy in the discard, and then Turbo Bolt to attach it. So you could play this with Regice using Water Energy to block EX decks, or more recently it was played with Jolteon EX and just Electric Energy, and you would attach to Jolteon EX and then try and basically get rid of any Pokemon that, or any decks that were only using basic Pokemon. It was for a long time a very good deck, and we're going to be sad to see it leave. Speaking of good decks, but I would argue one that most people are not sad to see it leave, Night March. Now we're losing all the Night Marches. Let's look at them together. We've got Joltik, we've got Pumpkaboo, we've got Lampent. Now Lampent to stage 1 with an awkward attack cost. Lampent was only in the deck, so you could use Battle Compressor to discard him. But you had Pumpkaboo and Joltik, both of whom had this Night March attack. 20 damage for each Night Marcher in the discard pile. Now Joltik only had 30 HP, but he could attack for a double colourless energy. That made him very, very useful. Pumpkaboo had a larger HP, but needed 3 colourless energy. Now you could use Dimension Valley to reduce the attack cost and bring it down to a double colourless, but then instead of Pokemon Energy, you need Pokemon Energy Stadium, and that makes it more awkward. Nice and simply, this deck was the bomb for a long time. You could get a whole bunch of Night Marches in the discard, and you could attack for a double colourless energy. When Fighting Fury Bout came out, you could even increase your HP and your damage as well. You're playing 12 Night Marches, you can get 11 in the discard and be attacking with the final one. That's 220 HP. That, ladies and gentlemen, is an awful lot of damage. Now, very, very, very difficult to do, but in the late game it was doable. It was not unusual to see people getting rid of 9 Night Marches on turn 1 and hitting for 180 damage, KOing EXs. And if you go second and can KO an EX on your very first turn of the game, you're probably going to win. Now, a weird anomaly is Golbat and Crobat. Now, both of these had cool little abilities that dropped damage counters. Evolve to Golbat, you drop 2 damage counters. Evolve to Crobat, you drop 3 more. Now, what's weird about this is that Golbat has been reprinted in the Generation set, but Crobat has not seen a reprint. So going forward into next season, you can still use Golbat to drop 2 damage counters, but you cannot use Crobat to drop the extra 3. And this was used in a whole bunch of decks. You could use it in Seismitoad when Hypnotoxic Laser rotated, you weren't doing enough damage, so you could use Golbat and Crobat to try and make it up. People would also use it with Lucario and Manectric, both of which do decent damage for 1 energy, so you could do good damage for a single, or Manectric really you wanted a second energy. 1 or 2 energy, decent damage on a basic Pokemon, and then you'd use these bats just to top up, so to speak. And this is what was so good about these bats. In any deck where you weren't quite doing enough damage, you could top up your damage using Golbat and Crobat. It was kind of fun. Now, 2 cards that did not see as much play as I would like them to have seen, Gengar and Mega Gengar. Now, we've talked a little bit in these videos about hit and run Pokemon, and that's what Gengar EX really was. Hit and then go back to the bench, and you could stick a Robo-Sub in the active, your opponent doesn't get a prize, or a Wobbuffet in the active, your opponent can't use abilities, or a Trevenant in the active, your opponent can't play trainers, etc. 60 damage is okay. Now, it was a Psychic and a double colourless, but remember you could use Dimension Valley to bring this down to 2 energy. It was a basic, but the energy cost really put most people off using this. It was also weak to Dark, and with cards like Yveltal and Zoroark seeing an awful lot of play, that was a bad weakness to have. But it did see a little bit of play here and there. Mega Gengar had a cool little attack for the same energy cost as Gengar, and again, this was a card that was really underused because of the weakness and the awkward attack cost. But you could use one of your opponent's Pokemon attacks as this attack, and it doesn't say you need the energy, so you could just copy it. You could essentially do any attack. You could copy redonkulous attacks. You know, for 2 energy, you could end up using Primal Groudon's attack, for instance. It was really quite cool. People played it, it saw a little bit of play, but it never saw a huge amount of play like that. Now, Wobbuffet has been a card which has seen an awful lot of play. Wobbuffet blocks abilities other than Psychic Pokemon when he's in the active. It has been used, for instance, to make sure that your opponent, to buy you some turns to set up when you're using Primal Groudon, for instance. And as I've said, it's been used in all these hit and run decks. The good news is that it was reprinted as part of the Radiant collection in Generations with fancy new artwork and everything, so he is going to remain in the format. Wobbuffet stays, and that's good. Wobbuffet was a card that saw a whole bunch of play, and it's a kind of interesting card we want to keep in the format. We are losing Malamar EX, and I think this is a very big loss. Now, first of all, it's just a fun little card, and it's the ability more than anything. Yeah, you could pile energy on him and use Maximar, and while we're here, can we just appreciate how amazing that attack name is? And you could just pile energy on and flip a whole bunch of coins, 60 for each head, 1 coin for each energy on him, just to see if you got lucky and did a whole bunch of damage. But that's not really why you played Malamar. Attach an energy, your opponent's active Pokemon goes to sleep. That means there's a 25% chance that they are going to be asleep going into their next turn. Yeah, pretty fun, quite frankly. Now, this could be used in a whole bunch of decks, but I'll give you one example. Recently, people were using it with Flareon EX. Flareon EX had a cool little ability which allowed you to bring an energy from one of your bench Pokemon onto Flareon. So you attached a Malamar and then move the energy over to Flareon. You could do the same thing with Aromatisse, with Fairy Energy, or Rainbow Energy, for instance. And it was really, really funky. It was a really fun little card, and again, it's a kind of card that you wouldn't always, you go to maybe 4 or 5 tournaments and see one person playing it. But when you played that guy, you'd go, oh, for goodness sake, not again. We're losing a whole bunch of good metal Pokemon. We're losing a Metal Lynx Bronzong, which allowed you to attach a metal energy from your discard to one of your bench Pokemon. This made the Genesect deck viable. Genesect, in order to attack, needs to discard energy. He's not going to be able to get enough energy on him without Bronzong. Yeah, he's got Max Elixir, but honestly, he's just not going to be good enough. We're losing Dialga EX. Now, Dialga saw a little bit of play in these metal decks here and there. It was never the most played Pokemon, but 150 for 4 energy, discarding 2 of them, 2 Bronzongs and a double colourless is how I think of that attack cost. 2 abilities from Bronzong, 1 double colourless, you're going. Stick a Muscle Band, you're doing 170. It was never a powerhouse deck, but it was one that people played. We also had Heatran, and he did 130 for 4 energy. Basically, Heatran was your non-EX attacker. If you're playing one of these metal decks, using cards like Dialga, like Genesect, you're really reliant on EX Pokemon. So being able to take a prize or 2 with a non-EX like Heatran, quite the bonus in turning the prize race in your favour. And the last cool metal Pokemon we're losing is Aegislash-EX. The attack was very meh, but it's the ability Mighty Shield. Blocks damage from attacks from any Pokemon that have a special energy attached. This is pretty gosh darn cool. Now, it's just damage, not anything else, so people would play Toxicroak EX as a bit of a counter. Toxicroak poisons and Aegislash doesn't stop it, but it was really quite a fun little card in these metal decks. You would get decks like Night March, for instance, that were very, very reliant on their double colourless energy, and Aegislash was really good for blocking these. Now, with the advent of cards like Hex Maniac, shall we say the effectiveness was very much dulled. It was never as good as it was once Hex Maniac came out, but it was still a card. I mean, we've seen this played right up until very, very recent times, right up until it got rotated out. There was a copy in Simone's second place list from Italian Nationals, for instance. I did a video about that, by the way. Hopefully I've put a link in the description if I've remembered. If I haven't, I do check the comments. If I've forgotten to put a link to that, stick it in the comments. I shall chuck it in. We're going to miss him. And the last couple Pokemon we're going to look at are a couple of fairies. Firstly, Florges EX. It's Bright Garden here. 2 fairy energy, and let's not forget that Aromatisse allowed you to move energy around, so, and you had the Geomancy Xerneas to get the energy on, so it wasn't difficult to get the energy on there. 20 times the number of grass and fairy Pokemon you have in play. You combine this with Skyfield, you can have up to 9, 8 bench plus the active. That's 180. Now we are rolling. Again, this was not a card that saw a huge amount of play, but I played against this more than once in tournaments, and I think this deserves a mention. And finishing off with a Pokemon, and I mentioned this in these videos before, but it's Pyroar and Slurpuff that have done worst out of this rotation. Slurpuff, we lost the good one that stopped abilities, but now we've lost the tasting one. Draw a card. If you're active, draw 2 cards. Now, there was a brief period where Lysander's trump card was legal. It got banned for being redonk, but there was a brief period it was legal. And what you would do is you would play Seismitoad, with all his tricks like Hypnotoxic Laser, Crushing Hammer, Super Scoop Up, etc. And in that deck, you would play Slurpuff. and you would use Slurpuff to draw all of your things. You could be drawing 3, 4, 5 extra cards a turn. You would run through your deck in very short time. You would use Lysander's trump card. Now that deck was so bad for the game, they literally banned Lysander's trump card to get rid of it. But ignoring all of that, it was Slurpuff that made it pretty good. So let's go and have a look then at the trainers which we are losing, the trainers which are going away. First, we're losing AZ. Now this hurts doubly because we're also losing Super Scoop Up. AZ became one of those supporters that, because everybody was playing Versus Seeker, AZ was played in every single deck as a one-off. You could use it to reuse Shaman, you could use it to pick up Pokemon that were about to get KO'd, you could use it to pick up Pokemon on your bench like Shaman to stop your opponent taking easy prizes. Now, since we've had VS Seeker, it was basically a one-off in every deck. But it was not as big a card as Battle Compressor was. Now, we might initially look at Battle Compressor and go, hang on a second, it's discarding 3 cards from your deck. I'm not convinced that everybody, when they initially saw this card, realised how good it was going to be. And if that sounds rude, I apologise. But there were things like Bronzong decks. And when Dark Patch was legal, Dark decks, they wanted energy in the discard, obviously in Expanded. Dark Patch is still legal, but Expand is not seeing a rotation, so we're sticking on Standard. You want energy in the discard, how do you get it there? Battle Compressor. You want Pokemon in the discard for Vespiquen and Night March decks, how do you get it there? Battle Compressor. Oh, Versus Seekers in the format, what people would do is just play a Battle Compressor to get rid of their only AZ, their only Hex Maniac, and in some cases their only Lysander or one of only 2. Boom. Now when they draw into a Versus Seeker, they can reuse any of them. It was ridiculous, ladies and gentlemen. We're losing Dimension Valley, and that's a problem for any Psychic decks, because quite frankly, these Psychic decks are going to struggle without it. Decks like Trevenant Break and his Silent Fear, 2 energy rather than 1 makes a huge difference. It turns it from a really good attack. You know, you can get a Trevenant Breakout in one go, and then straight away, you can go ahead and, you know, you can have 1 out one turn with 1 energy and 1 out the next turn with another energy. Night March obviously is being rotated as well. You know, Wobbuffet attacking for a single energy. All Psychic Pokemon, no, that's a lie. All Psychic Pokemon that had a colourless in their attack cost will miss this. We're losing Enhanced Hammer, or at least we would be, if it wasn't for the fact that it was reprinted as a secret rare in Primal Clash. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, remember the rule. If one version has been reprinted, all versions are legal. So because we've got the secret rare, you can use any Enhanced Hammer in a tournament. We're losing Headringer and Jamming Net. These were the fancy tools that you could put on your opponent's Pokemon EX. Now, Headringer was much, much better than Jamming Net. Jamming Net did see a little bit of play. One cool trick people would use is combine Jamming Net with Hard Charm, so your opponent's attacks did 40 less damage, and we saw some fairy decks especially, do really well with this. But it was a niche trick that people got bored of a little while ago. Headringer was much, 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 much better. Headringer increased the attack cost by 1. I've already told you that Manectric decks would play this, so your opponent had a tool on, but Energy Denial decks that played Crushing Hammer and Enhanced Hammer would also play this, so you could both up your opponent's energy costs they needed while getting rid of their energy at the same time. It was pretty cool. We're losing RoboSub. I've mentioned RoboSub a few times. I liked RoboSub. It could buy you a turn, especially in a hit and run deck. I played this in Mineshow. I played this in Donphan. I played this in Regirock. I bought a playset of 4 RoboSubs, and those 4 RoboSubs did see an awful lot of play. Now, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about Lysander's trump card, because Lysander's trump card was banned. Similarly, I'm not going to talk much about Professor Sycamore or Shauna. Yes, they've been reprinted. Yes, I mentioned them in my X and Y video. I don't think I need to go through them again. One thing I do need to mention, however, is Steel Shelter. Same with roller skates, we mentioned that in a previous video. Steel Shelter was a fun little stadium, which basically meant that all of your metal Pokemon could not be affected by special conditions. Now, to be fair, this was a much bigger deal when Hypnotoxic Laser was in the format, but just, you know, let's say you, and again this has been rotated as well, but let's say you play against an Excelgor deck. Auto Paralysis, oh no it doesn't! Steel Shelter. Froakie, Greninja decks like using Froakie to bubble and paralyze to buy a turn. Not when Steel Shelter's out. Target Whistle for me is going to go down as one of those cards that I think should have been played a lot more than it actually was. It allows you to grab one of your opponent's Pokemon from the discard pile, put it onto their bench. Why would you want to do that? KO it with either bench damage or Lysander and KO it in the active. But you could also just go, oh, I really hope my opponent doesn't draw into a Shaman to draw more cards. Oh, wait a second. I'll play a Target Whistle. Now their bench is full, so they can't play a Shaman down to draw more cards. And of course, as I said in the previous video, this comboed really nicely with Puzzle of Time. You play 2 Puzzle of Time, search your discard for any 2 cards, go for a Target Whistle and a Lysander, boom, last 2 cards. Tiano's been reprinted in Breakpoint. Why he gets so many reprints, I will never know, but he has. What's kind of cool is that Versus Seeker would be the biggest loss. Now, to be fair, I'm not entirely sure because Battle Compressor and Versus Seeker are maybe the 2 biggest cards in the format. We should have lost them both. But as I've said, if any version has been reprinted, and Versus Seeker was printed as a secret rare in Roaring Skies. We are losing Xerosic, and this is bad, because we're also losing Startling Megaphone. Xerosic allowed you to get rid of either a special energy or a tool on your side of the field or your opponent's, so you could use it, for instance, to get rid of a head ringer that your opponent put on your Pokemon. Xerosic was another one like AZ that was basically a one-of in every single deck. The utility was too much. Getting rid of a Fighting Fury belt because your opponent had too high a HP, so you could knock it out. Getting rid of a Floatstone to strand a Pokemon in the active position. Getting rid of a double colourless while knocking out your opponent's active Pokemon to get rid of all their energy on the board. I could go on, but I could be here for quite some time. The point is, Xerosic was a utility card that did a lot of fun stuff. And we're losing Mystery Energy. It allowed you to retreat Psychic Pokemon a little bit more easily. Didn't give them free retreat, it reduced it by 2, but it meant that you could retreat cards like Trevenant and Wobbuffet a little bit more easily. Was it the best card ever? No! Of course it wasn't. It didn't see a huge amount of play. But it was pretty cool just for the kind of stuff you could do with it. Wobbuffet has a retreat cost of 2, so you go ahead and put this on and you get to go and get free retreat. And I've already said that Wobbuffet was played in a whole bunch of decks just because it could be. You could also play it with Trevenant. Now Trevenant had a retreat cost of 3, but you put this energy on there, it reduces it to 1, and then you can just retreat, paying the mystery energy as the cost. And that'll do, ladies and gentlemen. Now, this is not my only video that I am doing. This is not the last video about the rotation. We are going to do a video about decks that you should be playing after the rotation. Obviously, Rayquaza's going to come up, but I like to think I'm going to mention a couple that you're maybe not thinking about as much as you should. That video is going to be exciting. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. Slightly 3 or 4 minutes longer than I'd hoped, but hey ho, these things happen. There's a comment section, you know what it's there for. There's a like button, you know what it's there for. There's a subscribe button, you know what it's there for. I've seen plenty of people putting comments on my videos lately. You deserve more subscribers. Obviously, I'm going to agree, but of course I'm going to agree. I am as biased as they come. But maybe you want to go find me a new subscriber or 2. Maybe that'll make me happy and I will go to bed tonight feeling like a happy chap, and it's going to be due to your lovely action. Hopefully so. Did that sound weird? I hope not. As always, the most important thing, look after yourselves till next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.